Taking a look at Capitol Hill now, during the last year of this war, Republicans have been at odds over whether the U.S. should continue supplying aid to Ukraine. The war is expected to intensify further in the months ahead, despite some GOP lawmakers seeking to downplay it. So for more on this, let's bring in CBS News political contributor and Democratic strategist Joel Payne and CBS News political analyst and Republican strategist Leslie Sanchez. Thanks for joining us, guys. Joel, I guess I'm going to start with you. A group of House Republicans led a congressional delegation to Ukraine ahead of this one-year mark. There are some, though, within the Republican Party that are calling for an end or slowing down of this military aid, this financial support that's being provided to Ukraine. What do you think this kind of divide? And I think it's a small group of Republicans, really. It's not sort of
but some of them who have very powerful voices.
That's a great point. What do you think this divide sort of signals, Joel?
Well, I think it signals, one, I think the tribal nature of politics. It's hard to believe that if a Republican president was leading the effort that President Biden is leading right now, that Republican president wouldn't have pretty unanimous support behind them to support and protect the sovereignty of the Ukrainian people. So I think the tribal nature of politics is somewhat comes to the fore for me. And I think also just the fact that the current Republican Party is at loggerheads. It's at a crossroads. You have to determine what type of political movement, political party you're going to be. Who are you going to stand on the side of? This is a pretty clear case where you've got the Ukrainian people who are having their sovereignty breached. And you've got President Zelensky, who has pretty unanimous support among the Western world. Historically, that is not a place where you see division within the American people and the American political support behind a figure like that. And so I think there are a lot of questions to answer for the Republican Party. And I think it's one of the reasons why, we're going to talk about that 2024 Republican primary. I imagine this will be a key issue that will differentiate some of those candidates when we get to that.
So Leslie, you have one group of Republicans, a small group, as Anne-Marie pointed out, that seem to be against the United States supporting a country defending its liberty and sovereignty. And then you've got a former Republican president, former President Trump, who puts out a statement saying that he understands how Kim Jong-un must feel with the United States and South Korea conducting military exercises together. And why are we doing that? He, quote, feels threatened, Kim Jong-un. Could you ever imagine a world where you have Republicans that seem to be against the defense of liberty and sovereignty in one country and a Republican president suggesting that the exercises that we conduct with South Korea to protect their liberty is something that should not be done?
It certainly speaks to the global change in doctrine, right? A lot of people would argue that is not the Republican Party, the hawkish Republican Party generations prior, when you saw the solidarity and standing in line, when it is not, it would be framed or characterized today very much the way that Ambassador Nikki Haley characterized it. It's not a war with Ukraine, it's a war against freedom. And that distinction, and I can think that long lens of history is really that chasm between how these two are characterizing it. I mean, you could argue China is saying, make China great again. Russia is saying, make Russia great again. And how is that posture going to be received, in the United States? That's the distinction. I think people looking back, you have McConnell, certainly Nikki Haley, who are taking that hawkish approach and saying, if we do not stand in solidarity in terms of intelligence and support we're giving Ukraine, you're going to see and they fear an expansion of not just the saber rattling of Putin and talking about moving away from the nuclear treaty, but really, could this escalate to Poland and the Baltics? What does that look like? And we are certainly not we don't have the European perspective, but we have the historical perspective. And you mentioned, and I'll kind of end on this point, it's not just Donald Trump. It is Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, who's also echoing something very similar. But I will say what unites Republicans is that they will not continue to fund endlessly the Ukrainian war without more accountability.
Got it.
Joel, some of these Republican presidential candidates are out there using the war in Ukraine as another talking point. You know, some of the allegations is that that President Biden sort of mishandled the U.S.'s role in this.
Also, what Leslie said, right? There's just money being poured into this war,
It certainly
and we don't
seems
see
like
an end
that,
game.
that every other week there's more. But you know, it's not just the U.S. Like there's all of NATO. But I'm just going to ask you, Joel, to sort of respond to the suggestion that President Biden mishandled the role that the U.S. plays in this war.
I think President Biden, for now going on a year, has held together a pretty tricky international coalition, a multilateral coalition of countries who all see the same stakes in Ukraine that the United States does. I think this is actually a place where President Biden has probably shined. And you would imagine this would be where President Biden would shine. He's a former chair of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, former vice president, a really respected international profile. So it's not surprising that this is a place where it feels like President Biden really found his sea legs. He admittedly, the handling of Afghanistan was less than what you'd want. But I think that this is a place where, you know, when we look back at least the first term of the Biden presidency, this will be a place where a lot of pride and a lot of agreement that President Biden handled this about as well as an American president can. And the last thing I'll just say, typically, you don't see domestic U.S. politics affecting American foreign policy, at least before the modern era. I think that's where we're at a sea change now, as well as that you've got Ron DeSantis comparing the border politics in Ukraine to the border politics in the United States. That's typically not something we've seen in the past.
Yeah, no, you're right. And even the noise that some Republicans have made about the president visiting East Palestine in Ohio versus visiting Ukraine, when in fact the president is the commander-in-chief responsible for national security. We can get into that. But Leslie, let's have a little fun here and do what we like to call the speculation round of our discussion. While we're looking ahead to 2024, I want to play for you and our viewers what South Carolina Senator Tim Scott told reporters when he was asked if he's ready to end the speculation on whether he would run for the presidency. Let's listen.
As I have a chance to speak around the state and get feedback, it will inform and educate me on how to accomplish the mission that I really believe is the most important part of my life.
All right, Leslie, so let me ask you to read his mind and tell us what you think. What kind of a signal is he sending here, and how would putting in his bid for the nomination shake it up as it stands right now? You've got Nikki Haley and Donald Trump who've officially announced. Is anybody officially? Yeah.
No, those are the
only two official announcements.
Right.
So what would that mean?
No, I'm glad you moved to Tim Scott. So the interesting part about him, he's somebody who is so dynamic and engaging in person. So the more that people get to know him personally, everyone walks away and goes, wow, he's just extraordinary on so many fronts. His life story, his professional accomplishments, you know, his agenda and his plan for where he wants America to go. But it's kind of this humble, hardworking nature, that retail politics style of his that will potentially ignite a lot of support in the early primaries. What a lot of people are doing is recognizing there's weakness in former President Donald Trump, and they're trying to see if they can actually put together a national campaign, meaning dollars. Can they start getting and coalescing some people that will commit early enough to get them through those first primaries, and the way the Republicans, you know, kind of align in their primaries, that's going to be critical, especially as we get to South Carolina. So it's a really good tack, and it benefits him to be talking this early in the legislative or the political calendar versus waiting when people just need to know more about what he's about.
Fascinating. Joel Payne and Leslie Sanchez, always love talking to both of you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And CBS News will mark 1 year since the war started with our special Ukraine invasion. 1 year later, you can stream that today at noon Eastern.